All right, thank you again for having me here. Again, I'm Mike Mendez. I'm the Vice President of Technology for Sapphire Energy. I came here today to talk to you about four basic things. I want to talk about energy, I want to talk about agriculture, and I want to talk about biotechnology. And last and more important, I want to talk about a solution that links these three together and will help to get us off the addiction, what I would say the addiction of oil that we can't depend upon. So that's the real focus of my talk. And as I go through it, hopefully you can see the connections and why it's actually important to us. Let's talk about some of the energy facts. And again, it's fun to talk about the facts because they're all big numbers and it kind of spooks us and scares us, but let's walk through it together. First off, energy is the largest market. It's unfathomable about the amount of money. As you see here, it began somewhat in earnest at only $0.4 trillion in the 1900s, predicted to be over $10 trillion in 2020. It's just mind-boggling, that kind of money, when you're talking about trillions of dollars. Let's talk about usage. That's another real powerful number to talk about. Since 1859, we have consumed 1.4 trillion barrels. We now predict that we have 1.4 trillion barrels left, or about 30 years in reserves. Again, another scary number. When we talk about these numbers, too, let's throw a few more. Worldwide consumption, we use 80 million barrels a day worldwide. In the United States, we use 20 million barrels a day. Again, those are all great, fun facts to talk about, but what's more powerful is to actually see those facts. Every 13 seconds, this is what we consume here in the United States. Every 13 seconds. It's one thing to talk about the facts, and it's one thing again to throw these numbers, but when you can finally visualize these barrels that roll through every 13 seconds, it is humbling. So again, let's walk through these numbers, okay? 850,000 barrels we use every hour, okay? 14,000 barrels we use every minute. 231 barrels we use every second, and this represents 13 seconds. And by the time I just got done explaining this, we just use another 12,000 barrels. Now, why is this so important to hit this home and to talk about these numbers? Is because if you don't have a solution that is scalable and can address this kind of sheer numbers, then you're not an energy company, you're a specialty chemical company. That's not energy. You need to look at this problem, and this is the problem you're going to have to face if you're going to really want to make a difference. I think as you've heard a lot from my speakers earlier on today, one of the major issues is the system we have in place cannot sustain itself. Hubbard's predictions of peak oil was spot on. As you guys just heard early on, demand is way up and production is way down. And what do we have coming next? We have China and India coming online, so demand is even going to be greater. There is no way we can sustain the demand versus productivity. We're going to have to find a solution. Another thing we've talked about a lot today is the environmental impacts that we have in this new space, in this new field. And we can tell one of the issues we're talking about today is as the oil becomes more and more scarce, one has to go further in more remote areas, one has to drill deeper, and you end up having to push the technology beyond its capabilities, and then we have issues that we have today. You have crises that take place. This is only going to continue to escalate as we go forward and start to drill deeper and then far more removed areas. The other environmental issue, which I don't need to spend too much time on, is greenhouse gases, CO2. If your solution makes more CO2, that's not a solution. Your solution has to consume CO2. If it consumes CO2, now you're going in the right direction. The last one that's again more political, but it's part of the arena, and that's called the ability to have national security. Let's walk through that number again. 1973, 80% of all the oil that we needed, we made ourselves. Today, we import 75% all of the oil. 37 years have taken place, we've had a complete reversal. We can't go on that way, it's impossible. Now, as oil gets more scarce, we've already fought wars over it. And as it gets worse, that's just going to escalate. It's estimated we have about 20 million barrels left here, about 5 years. So we have to have a solution within 5 years, or we need to start thinking about where we're going to get it from. The next thing, as I told you about, is I said I wanted to talk about energy and I want to talk about agriculture. So if one's going to truly scale this, and it's going to be an agricultural solution, there are two things you're going to have to do to truly be scalable. One is you cannot use arable land. Arable land is there to grow food. If you have arable land, grow food. That's a really good idea, right? Secondarily, fresh water. fresh water is going to be more valuable than the fuel I'm going to make. You cannot use fresh water. Now, again, if I wanted to be a quick company, make a quick buck, I could care less about those two entities. But if you're going to be a long-term solution, those are two basic principles you have to have in place. No arable land and no fresh water, or again, you're not an energy company. Let's have a physics lesson. So, energy. Energy cannot be created or it cannot be destroyed. It can only change forms. You can change from one form to the next form, but that's first principles of physics. So the concept early on with the energy crisis was take the sun, convert the sun to sugar, take the sugar and make it into fuel. This doesn't seem like a very good plan to me. Again, we've gone from here to here to here to get the fuel we want. Making sugar into fuel is a bad idea. If you're going to go to all the trouble to make sugar, make cookies. I like cookies particularly. So save the sugar, don't use it to make fuel, guys. That doesn't make any sense. But what's better sense is can you use photosynthesis to go directly to fuel? Now that is scalable. That is the right answer. Take sunlight, convert it directly into a fuel. And more important, pick a fuel that fits into the infrastructure. Don't make a fuel that someone's going to have to buy a new car. That doesn't work either. There's three great fuels that we love: diesel, gasoline, and jet fuel. Make those three, and again, you have a solution. So let's talk about photosynthesis. And again, what led us to algae. That's the other thing I want to point out. Sapphire Energy, which I work for, and I'm a co-founder of, we're not an algae company. We're an energy company. We happen to pick algae because it's just the best platform, guys. And this is a clean example of that. Out of all the biomass on the planet, out of all the plant biomass on the planet, algae only really is about 3% of all the biomass on the planet. But when you look at photosynthesis, it covers about 60% of all the photosynthesis on this planet is done by that 3% of biomass. Why is that? Because microalgae doesn't spend any time making roots, stems, leaves. It has no interest in actually looking quite pretty. All it does is grab photons of light, then divides. It grabs photons of light, and then divides. It has a powerful photosynthetic efficiency, which translates in its overall capacity to generate biomass. So again, here's some good examples. When you compare corn to algae, you can see that algae is 4 times more effective in actually producing biomass. And again, now it's a scalable system. I can harness photosynthesis to generate the biomass that I need. Is this a new idea? Actually not, which is always sad, 'cause I like to feel like I'm clever, but I'm not. This is actually an extremely old idea. Matter of fact, this idea is about 400 million years old. That's how old this idea is. Huge algae blooms sank to the basins, got covered up, and that is where all the petrochemicals that we drill today came from these large algae blooms 400 million years ago. Pretty good idea. Now, the US government came across and looked at it 20 years ago in this Aquatic Species Act, and here's what they concluded. They concluded that actually you could take algae and you could make barrels of biodiesel for $80 a barrel. They concluded that this was doable. But then the final part of the report says, but why would you ever need to do that? Because crude oil would never hit that price. It's the truth. Again, not my idea. We're playing off of 2 good ideas to work through it, okay? So here's where Sapphire Energy came into play. So first off, within starting the company, those barrels that I showed you early on, that picture of those number of barrels was so humbling to me that how could you take on a problem? So that, in my mind, with this whole concept of photosynthesis, led to the whole concept, the only way to address this is with agriculture. So what Sapphire Energy has done is it's taken ideas from ag, it's taken ideas from the energy, and we've brought them together using biotechnology. So let's go in and learn a little bit about what is modern agriculture. Here's a great example. So this is an example. This is corn. Corn is one of the most prolific crops that we have today, but maybe people don't understand its history. 7,000 years ago, the first quote-unquote corn was a plant called teosinte. It looked closer to actually wheat than it did corn 7,000 years ago. Up to 1,000 years ago, we finally have something that actually looks like a corn plant. It took 6,000 years of breeding to get teosinte from that little tiny squib of a wheat-like thing into what we can call corn. Today, now modern corn has now emerged to be, again, it's a global product that's being produced. It's taken 7,000 years to go from teosinte to what we know now as modern corn. Now, what does that translate? Well, algae's got to be the same way. okay? I can't use a wild-type algae to actually go to a large-scale agricultural process. You have corn, you have wheat, you have soybeans. You have all these examples that you look from ag. All of them will acquire the ability to change it and to domesticate it. That is my main focus scientifically at Sapphire, is to domesticate algae, give it all the traits that one needs to make it an actual energy crop. And that itself, and using those verbiage and that word is powerful. So I'm talking about the design of an energy crop. To be a crop, you have to have all the traits to actually go to large-scale production. One of the issues that I face, though, is unlike teosinte, I don't have 7,000 years, and I don't even have 7,000 days. So with that in mind, I'm going to have to accelerate it. I'm going to have to borrow modern techniques and breeding, bring it all together for us to actually hit the timelines that we're going to need to make a difference. There are 4 traits in agriculture that make a difference. And again, all these ideas I share with you, none of them were mine. I just happened to spend some time reading textbooks on agriculture and learn from what farmers need to go ahead. Here are the four main categories one has to have. One is crop protection. If you can't grow your crop and it's not protected, then you're just growing things up to feed things that are actually not our gasoline, our diesel, or our jet fuel. You need crop protection. It's the #1 trait that makes all the difference in a farmer's life. Secondarily is the ability to harvest. How does one take algae out of these large ponds, out of this large waterway, and to make harvesting far more cost effective? Using giant centrifuges is not going to be the answer. How do I get the algae out of the water? How do I make harvesting a much more cost-effective procedure? Product profile, again, another page out of agriculture. How can I turn what's being produced in algae to make it far more profitable? As an idea of that is, if I'm going to make fuel, if I'm going to make crude oil, I'd rather make it look like Texas sweet versus what comes out of the shale up in Canada. So when you're talking about product, make the right product for the cost to return. Last is yield. Yield is the most important aspect about agriculture. And a good example of yield is having the ability to grow algae, as I said before, not in fresh water, but in salt water, so you can increase its ability to grow in many different areas. So that way you can increase your yield overall. Actually, the data that I'm going to show today in the next 2 slides, I have not talked about in public. This is the first time I've spoke about it, especially the next slide, which is very exciting. So the 4 categories that I talk about, these 4 traits that are important in agriculture, they turn out to be just as important in algae. So what we did immediately was we were able to make algae Roundup resistant. Great herbicide, one of the most powerful herbicides that has shaped the modern agricultural revolution has been now I can protect my crop. That was the first trait that we did, was to get Roundup resistant. Secondarily was, how could we harvest the algae and get it out of the ponds? This was actually quite clever molecular biology. We were able to turn a trigger and to get algae to actually clump and then float. So instead of using large centrifuges, I had a molecular trigger that I would turn on, the algae would all come together, it would float, and you could harvest it directly from the ponds without actually using centrifugation. Again, using molecular biology. Third is actually engineering a novel hydrocarbon. This hydrocarbon has a much higher energy density than algal oil itself, and now I'm able to sculpture the algae oil to look far more like Texas sweet than anything else before, increasing its energy density. The last one is its ability to grow in salt water. So we were able to take a freshwater organism, change its genetics, and now it can grow in brackish water. Why the picture of a surfer? I'm from San Diego. You always got to put a surfer in your talk. It's kind of a standard thing. We like that. Now I want to go back to yield, because yield is so important. It just really is. It's the hallmark of agriculture. How does one improve yield and increase yield? And again, this is the first time I've shared this work out of my lab. What we've done here is we've looked at photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the most powerful chemical reaction in the world today. It is the source of all life as we know it. Photosynthesis takes CO2, it takes water, and it takes two carbons and it fuses them together. It's that chemical bond between the 2 carbons, that's the energy stored, that we use. You break that carbon bond and you take that energy, and that's what you use to run everything else on. So photosynthesis is the key to being able to make the fuels that we want and to get the yield that we want. What we've done most recently, I'm actually giving another talk on Wednesday here in DC, is we've been able to make a synthetic chloroplast. All photosynthesis occurs in the chloroplast of algae and in most plants, or all plants, I should say. We've been able to make a synthetic version of it, and make a system that allows us for the first time ever to evolve photosynthesis, where we can drive the process. It's very powerful science, and it's going to make a huge, huge deal for us when we go forward to increase yield in algae. If you've noticed, though, right next to my algae picture is a corn picture, because what also you find out is that this is going to have a huge impact on all crop plants, too. If you can increase photosynthesis in crop plants, the yield you're going to get will be tremendous. So again, it's the marriage of energy and algae and now agriculture that you're seeing is going to make a big turning point. So what I'm talking about is about energy, but you can see it's going to have a huge impact on agriculture also. How's this all going to work out? Well, again, wasn't difficult. Look in the books and find out an example from ag how actually one would do these things. And one of the first things to look at is how rice is growing. Rice is again, 27% of all of the dietary energy comes from rice. And it's all done for $0.30 per kilogram. That's extremely cheap. So what you see is in the top picture, that's an algae farm, or what an algae farm should look like. It should look like a rice paddy. Below is not an algae pond. That actually is the fountain at the Bellagio. So why am I showing you that? It's because I'm sure I could grow algae, and that great fountain has lights, and it has like things jumping up and down. I bet I could get great yields in that pond at the Bellagio. One can grow corn in a greenhouse. That also gets you great yield, but we don't do it. Why don't we do it? Because it's about cost. So again, the top picture, that's what an algae farm looks like. The bottom picture is not an algae farm. And why do I bring that up? Because again, colleagues of mine in this field keep talking about how we're going to use these giant bioreactors to grow the algae up. That's not cost effective. We don't grow corn that way. We're not going to grow algae that way. Where are we at today? We've been very blessed in a lot of ways. The Department of Energy, the USDA, has granted Sapphire Energy $104 million to build an integrated biorefinery. I'm breaking ground in September on this. It's going to consist of 300 acres. We're going to be producing 80 barrels a day. The whole point of this is to ask the question, what's the cost of producing fuel when you're at 10 acres to when you're at 300 acres? Is it really scale and cost? Can you truly bring the cost down when you hit the sizes that we're going to need to make a difference? And the USDA and the Department of Energy has helped us to answer that question. So again, groundbreaking on this facility, which is in southern New Mexico, begins in September, and we should be fully online by 2012. Next question, have we actually made any fuel? The answer is yes. As I talked about, we make fuel that makes a difference. It has to fit into infrastructure. We've made jet fuel, we've made gasoline, and we've made diesel. These are two examples. One of the first things I focused on was making jet fuel. And why? Because there's nothing like jet fuel mimic. You can't mimic jet fuel. It has a precise chemical makeup, and it's the most difficult fuel to make. We made over 600 gallons of jet fuel. We flew a plane out of Tokyo. We flew a plane out of Houston on Continental as a demonstration of the fuel's capabilities. We've made diesel and gasoline, have driven a car across the country, actually from Sacramento to the White House, as another demonstration that we can make these fuels. And these fuels are exactly what you would think they are, nothing different. Let me go through now and summarize. Last two slides. What is the point then? The first point is that, is this truly scalable? The answer is yes. All we had to do was to make algae a crop, and then it became scalable. Secondarily, if you're going to make fuel, it has to be fungible. It has to fit into the infrastructure of today. That is so important. If I didn't make a fuel that I could have delivered to you, then I need to make two companies. One company to make the fuel, another company to deliver it to the customers. Don't do it. There's a great infrastructure. We have great gas stations everywhere. Have that as part of your delivery method to get your product out. Don't try to make a brand new fuel that we have to break a brand new infrastructure for. Critically important. As I said before, do not compete with arable land and do not compete with fresh water. Don't do it. That's not a long-term solution. Last, and the other thing that people don't often talk to me, is what's the CO2 usage? You have to have a favorable CO2 usage, and we have a reduction of 70% of a footprint using our technology, and most of that is by the CO2 that we consume. In ending, what I want to talk about and finish up in the note is, we look at energy right now, and this conference is about energy, but I want to put it out to you that how we're going to solve this solution is using agriculture. And by fusing energy and agriculture and biotechnology, that really is going to be the solution. So we have to look toward how ag can make these solutions happen. So that's really where we're at today, and what we are really in the midst of a brand new agricultural revolution and a brand new platform. Thank you today.